welcome back. I am Aaron Sheehan, the host of the B2B Uncut podcast, sponsored by Commerce, the leading B2B e-commerce platform. And I'm joined today by a lovely man who I've known for some years. Lovely in personality, if not in looks. That's fair. Uh, my elder, Mr. Jim Herbert. Jim, would you like to introduce yourself for our audience?
Thank you for that, Aaron. Jim Herbert. I'm the CEO of Patchworks. Patchworks is an integration platform as a service. I'll get into that a little bit more, later on for sure. I've been here for a couple of years now. Prior to that, I've worked with you, another e-commerce platform, for a couple of years. And I'm basically a bit of a nerd, to be honest with you. So I'm a technical CEO, without a doubt. I've been programming computers since I was 8 years old, when my dad turned up with a Sinclair ZX Spectrum, Timex Sinclair over in the US, of course. But very rapidly got into assembly language, had a BBC microcomputer over here, which is 6502. They created the ARM chip. So I kind of got involved in RISC early on, computer science degree and all that stuff. Somehow got into e-commerce in around 99. Had my own agency, built loads of Hybris websites with that agency back in the day, Generic, as well as some Demandware and ATG, right? I think we were talking the preamble about my living in Boston very briefly in the mid-90s. I was back and forth to Boston, then in the late 90s and into the early 2000s because of our technology group, right? One of the very first B2C platforms out there. And in fact, a friend of mine who's working at PS and I designed the B2B module, which I believe is still running in a few Oracle customers around the world. So
it's true.
Maybe
some of those people might be in our pipeline right now.
Exactly. Well, honestly, the PS team took my organization design within that B2B module and they just spelt it with a Z. There you go. I'll do that in the American way.
A Z.
Yeah, exactly. A Z, exactly. So, but Priceless, all that kind of good stuff. I've been around there a lot and what's pretty heavily in B2B e-commerce. And yeah, thank you for having me on. That was a very long preamble, wasn't it?
Well, it was good, but there's a lot to cover there, and you've established your bona fides, I guess, and your knowledge of the field. So for all transparency, for all the listeners, Patchworks is officially a technology partner of Commerce. We have a connector on the Patchworks. Is it a marketplace? Do you call it a marketplace or an app store? What is your language? Yeah,
no, it's a marketplace. Absolutely
marketplace.
right.
Yeah, that's right. And so you use an acronym earlier there in your preamble, Jim. You said iPaaS. And that wasn't a word for anybody listening at home. That's several letters. That's an iPaaS. It's a tech acronym. We love acronyms in technology. Could you describe maybe, because I find a lot of people don't know what an iPaaS is. It's not new technology in my opinion, but it's a newer term for older technology is one way I look at it. What is an iPaaS and how would you distinguish it from the thing I used to work with, which would be an ETL tool? And what's the difference between them, or is there a difference between them? Walk us through a little bit like what you do exactly.
Part of the intro, you did kind of point out that I'm in my 50s. And one of the amusing things that us 50-year-old people like to talk about is the kind of reinvention of the same technology over and over again, right? But it's always slightly moved on, So if you look at iPaaS, you'd looked at ETL tools, you'd have looked at enterprise service bus, ESB, service-oriented architecture, microservices, they're all kind of iterations and evolutions, in my opinion, of pretty sound principles at the end of the day. So to describe an iPaaS, let's talk about what you do if you didn't have one or an ETL tool. You'd write code, right? So I was out for lunch actually talking with a partner over here about some of the old Hybris work I did with Generic, my agency back in the day. And maybe we'd integrate Hybris through to Business Central, right? Or Dynamics and Navision as it was back in the day. And then the example we were using, which is one of their existing customers, was, I don't know what I'm talking about, actually, Rafa. So Rafa's the cycling gear and stuff. If you look at me on LinkedIn, I'm really into my cycling. And they had a bit of a moan at me. We moved in the quote. I was working in the sales team in my agency. And they were like, okay, well, why is it costing, I think it was like 80 grand. I don't remember the exact numbers because again, old. But it wasn't cheap, right? To write a load of Java and host it between Hybris and Navision. Surely you've done this before. I was like, yeah, we have done this before. We did for Arcade Bennett. But the way services contracts are written is the IP is owned by the customer unless you can carve it out in some way, shape or form. So I can't use that code because it's owned by somebody else. We're quicker at it. It's actually more expensive then. We know what we're doing and yours will be different. But we're going to have to write that code. Now, once you've written that code, which is costly, that's the sunk cost. Then it's just maintenance, right? Fine. But you still want to host it somewhere, right? Code that's moving data back and forth in near real time or real time isn't going to be, just sitting on a server in a corner of a room doing nothing, if you know what I mean.
Hopefully.
So then you've got to secure it. Then you've got to make sure it scales up for Black Friday and all that other good stuff. So I think that's what moves us on to the iPaaS world. So the iPaaS world, I think where it really differs from an ETL tool is the SaaS portion of it, particularly the way Patchworks works, right? So if you want to connect some systems together, so if you want to connect Oro through to one of the other 130 plus connectors we have in our marketplace at the moment, effectively, you can come on right now. If you're a partner, actually, you can go in, create an account. So it's true multi-tenant SaaS that will create this kind of sandbox environment that's completely, utterly, isolated from what everybody else running on Patchworks. You can add the connector from the marketplace or Oro. You can go and add let's use Business Central, because I was talking about that earlier on, into there. And then you can start building the flows out to actually do the integration of the data and the mapping. Maybe there's some templated flows already existing because it's happened before and they're in our marketplace too. Maybe there's a blueprint that one of our partners has built that you can pay a small amount of money for to then really accelerate that integration process. Or if you're an agency, you can install that reference architecture from something you're doing and doing often across multiple customers. And so it's that SaaS nature, that software as a service nature of the multi-tenant SaaS, the web-based interface, I think really differentiates iPaaS from ETL, so to speak. ETL tools have a lot of stuff in there for around, changing the data, making the transformations in the data, and work with EDI and scripting and things like that. But those all do exist in iPaaS as well. They have to at the end of the day. I think the difference with old ETL tools is it's a little bit more complicated to provision them, to be blunt. It's probably as simple as that.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas an iPaaS, it's just there. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
As somebody that's had to use some of those old ETL tools, I completely agree, right? You're doing the same work regardless. It's where is it hosted, how is it provisioned, and how is it secured is also a piece of it, because sometimes hosting your own ETL, I have seen people get into trouble occasionally because they forgot that
Yeah.
that's something open to the public internet. Um, Okay, well, that makes perfect sense to me. So it is hosted software that connects two or more bits of software together. This is a topic that comes up for us all the time, right?
Yeah.
In our partner network and our professional services team, in my experience, which is, when should a business look at implementing an iPaaS instead of having point connectors connecting, let's say, their e-commerce platform with their ERP, and that connector is like, scheduled jobs sitting on a web server module of the ERP or something. I've given SAP the money, and they've given me a little server with a little business API on the back end. When would you want to use an iPaaS as opposed to rolling your own?
For me, it's the moment it gets complicated. Unless there's a weird thing to say, when is that, right? It could even be two apps. So we do a lot with a lot of different e-commerce platforms, and obviously the big green Canadian one. I won't mention it by name on this podcast, but everyone knows.
Right. We don't really compete with them, so it's fine.
Fair point.
I don't have the PTSD that I used to have when we worked together.
Fair point, well made. See, maybe that's it. It's been drummed into me, right? Shop obviously killing it in the D2C space. They're winning lots of brands that go direct to consumer. And they have a massive app store, as they call it, the app store, right? So you can install an app that will, integrate NetSuite, and you can install an app that will integrate PeopleBox for WMS, and you can install an app that will integrate to the TikTok store. What you'll discover is those apps are all written independently by different developers with different, SLAs and different, levels of configurability in them ultimately. And because they run independently, you can get yourself into real problems with where is the order? Where has my order gone to? At what point am I? Is it in the warehouse? Oh no, it's in NetSuite. Or why is it not in the warehouse? Or I don't know, because that bit hasn't happened. That kind of level of configuration and change is very difficult to manage, especially then if you do have a roll your own in there as well, which sometimes people do, right? They're like, I'll use this app for this and use that app for that. And I'm a big believer in avoiding the hammer anti-pattern. So I don't want to say, iPaaS solves everything, if you know what I mean. But the point of the iPaaS goes back to that enterprise service bus, architecture decision that I mentioned earlier on, is that you have a sort of central area to choreograph all the data through your business. So the moment I think you start getting to a point where you are talking to more than one system, you should immediately start considering an iPaaS. I think in the past, the price point of iPaaS has been a problem there. If you're talking about a $50 app here and a $70 app there and an $80 app there, and then you go into an iPaaS and it's going to be $5,000 straight away a month. There's a huge difference. So you need to be able to support that. But that's what some of the work, customers like companies like us at Patchworks, and some of our competitors, to be fair, there are other people out there. There's always a bit of a race to the bottom when you get your entrance into a market. But, when you start looking at that, actually, if the order numbers are low or the data numbers are low, there are gross plans that you can start on that actually means it's probably the same price as 5 apps, if you know what I mean. And then, oh, actually, I need this and I need that. Okay, great. We can have the conversation around usage ultimately to grow that out. So it's a way of understanding complexity. So ultimately, if you've got complexity in your tech stack that you're struggling with, that you need to rely on developers from, that's when you need to talk to an iPaaS.
Brilliant. I love the explanation. I pretty much agree with you on that. It's a scale thing for me, is when you start
Yeah.
having multiple apps, or you have data governance needs that don't fit when you're building point connectors. I've talked to a handful of companies over the years where the iPaaS was kind of the beginning of their digital transformation, and I think
Yeah.
what it is, you implement that, and then it unlocks all kinds of possibilities that you didn't have before. And I believe you just won an award last night. Is that right? For
We
something.
did.
For something.
We
What was it? I
won.
saw a bit something on LinkedIn. What was that, Jim?
I've already posted it 4 times, I think. We won the UK e-commerce awards 2024 innovation award. And a lot of that was down to another key tenet of what we do at Patchworks, which is our no code, low code interface. The idea of that is, to write minimum amounts of code to do the integrations. So, a great example would be, again, this lunch I've just been on, because obviously different time zones. Over here, we were talking about one of our competitors, and to create a new connector to a new platform, they have to write it for you. Basically, they go off and build a connector, and it's in the backlog. It'll happen depending on how much money you're spending with them. It'll happen more quickly or not, right? That's how we all know how the world works. We've got this no code, low code interface. It is low code, right? So you don't you can put scripting into it. And did so. If you've got things like a Postman collection, and this is a conversation we had, obviously, when the Oro connector was being put into the marketplace, we can import that Postman collection. It takes about 30 seconds. And then it's a question of going through all the endpoints and testing them, ultimately. And it takes as long as that takes. So Met's a new entry to the UK market in the WMS space on Monday. They sent me their Postman collection. It was 10 endpoints. As a technical CEO, I built the connector in front of them to show them how easy it was to do it. And then, I tested all the get endpoints. They tested some of them. They're like, thanks for that. It's in the marketplace. That's all through that no code, low code interface. And so that award was, doing that kind of innovation ultimately. And super proud of the entire team. As I said on LinkedIn, leading a company is just that. It's leading the company. It's the guys in the company have done all the work. So I'm super proud of everything they've done there. It's an amazing bit of tech. I'm saying that with my techie hat.
Yeah. Of course, all things. So let's get into our audience. As I think I said in the preamble before we started recording, is it's largely B2B. This is the
Yeah.
B2B Uncut podcast. And so I'm curious if you're, first off, do you have any customers trading business to business, any distributors or manufacturers with the kind of that arm, that channel?
We do. We have more B2B light, I think you'd call it. So probably not, any major distributors or manufacturers that Oro would normally deal with. It's more on the on the kind of Shopify big commerce customers that are using B2B modules ultimately to provide like a fashion apparel, for instance, where they're going to have a B2B arm for selling. Castor's a great example. One of our customers heads the branded shirt. They have a B2B background for selling shirts back and forth, within kind of B2B environment. So we do have B2B customers though. I think that's the key thing to say. And actually, we've got some pretty big ones. See, there's a German manufacturer live on the site. Can't say their name. They do hundreds of millions, both B2B and B2C, and they're transacting through Patchworks really well right now. So.
That's fantastic. Do you see? I'm curious. We talk on this podcast a lot about the heady phrase digital transformation, which everybody with a LinkedIn account talks about digital transformation. I think. And we talk the reason that we talk about it in the B2B context is there are so many offline or analog processes that are still that's how these manufacturers and distributors especially in many ways are kind of the last people I find to digitize. But everything, right? The how I sell is happening on a phone or in a fax. Getting paid is happening with a paper check. Publishing a catalog is I go to the printers and I send off a paper catalog to people. When do you see an iPaaS maybe brought into the tech stack in a digital transformation use case? So if I am a manufacturer, let's say a German manufacturer perhaps, and I'm saying, I've got all of these paper offline processes, a lot of errors. There's a lot of double checking and a lot of running down, like, where did that order go? Why
Yeah.
is this money in my bank account? When you have an iPaaS conversation with a company like that, when do you get brought into that? And then what is your sort of place in the overall digital transformation project?
It's, um, it's a really interesting use case actually, because they tend to be larger projects, right? So you'll tend to be talking to an educated buyer. I think, if I mentioned earlier on the B2C side, talking to sort of smaller brands, maybe, who are struggling with loads of apps, but don't really understand, that an iPad is a thing. They'll Google, how do I connect to Vico? I need to make that happen, basically. Oh, they'll find us. And then as part of our discovery call, it will be, oh, well, this is what we did. Oh, that's brilliant. I haven't even thought of that, which is brilliant. But you kind of go, oh, okay, this is going to be an interesting one. Then you probably need to get an agency of whole that can help you along the journey on that side of things. It's probably not an IT team. B2B businesses, on the sheer nature of everything you just described, tend to have a larger IT team, an IT department, in our experience, or they certainly have people who understand those paper processes and the logic that goes behind them and how to deal with all that kind of thing. So again, when you start to show them a tool that effectively allows you to build a process in an iPaaS, like you would in a Miro diagram, or again, showing my age Visio back in the day, they go, oh, brilliant. I get this. I can actually start moving the data around from that side of it. So they tend to come in and get involved when the digitization's already started, if you know what I mean. So when they're already moving off paper onto a platform, onto an eCommerce at the front end to automate their sales team or whatever, or to, automate it by actually getting people to come directly in and put the orders through. And then they're moving that down through into some sort of ERP distribution technology, whatever it is that moves it around. Or oddly, products data. That's the other thing, product and prices, because, getting that out of an ERP and putting that into the platform that's now going to be, augmenting or replacing some of the sales team, that's a pretty hefty piece of work. You've got to make sure they're up to date. You need to make sure they're accurate. You need to make sure they're probably going to be personalized to that customer's individual price list. Back in the Hybris days, they signed Granger down in South Africa, and they had to rebuild the entire price list system. So we would work on a NoSQL database, because the amount, terabytes of pricing data, because
Yeah.
it's 18,000 customers, all with individualized catalogs of 8 million SKUs or something. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was huge. And so that's a lot of data to move around. Now that's interesting, because that can come through the iPads, but there's a cost to it. You're moving so much data around, you're moving all that around. Maybe that's where the direct integration also takes place. And that's where I come back to that hammer anti-pattern piece, right? Use an iPad for the bits that make sense. But if other bits, even if they make logical sense, don't make monetary sense, then, maybe a CSV file's fine.
Yeah, exactly. I love two things. Two things that sort of stood out to me. One is the second time you used this sort of hammer anti pattern,
Yeah,
which I love. That is the everything. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I assume that's the reference there. So
that's spot on. Yeah.
fantastic, fantastic. I think there's some companies that probably need to maybe hear that phrase and think hard about their own offerings, maybe. Um, but, the other thing you mentioned is you name dropped Granger, and I will be honest, if I, had a beverage every time somebody name dropped Granger on this podcast and in my life, I would have my liver would be in much worse shape, and I was thinking of all the people who aren't going to probably name drop Granger on this podcast, this British fellow probably wouldn't be, and yet here we are. This is the world that we're in, so shout out to all of the ex-Granger people and current Granger people listening to this podcast. I do know you're out there. Um you mentioned ERP several times,
Yes.
actually, because it is sort of, an unescapable fact of life, I think. They are the beating hearts of pretty much any sort of real, mid-market or enterprise business. Um, Generally, everyone hates their ERP is what I found. No one has warm feelings about it. They're often quite old. People are stuck with an ERP decision that was made, 8 CTOs ago, right? Like, perhaps
Yeah.
it's an IBM Mapix, mainframe kind of setup. I see I'm old too.
Yeah.
At Oro, right, our customer base, we have a pretty spread around, right? We've got plenty of customers on SAP, different flavors, S/4HANA, B1, all of them. NetSuite, we see Odoo, we see Dynamics, we see all kinds of Acumatica even. I'm gonna ask for an opinion, and I don't know what your partner situation is here. So, but I'm curious, who do you see doing really well in the ERP space? And I'll ask specifically in the context of business to business, if there's anybody that you think is doing well, because it's not known for. You won an award last night for innovation. Who's winning the
Yeah.
innovation award in the ERP in the ERP world?
So, we're not, well, we are partners with them, but really we partner with them via our agency partners. Ultimately, they use them a lot. So Odoo, over here in Europe are really starting to, deliver some pretty amazing stuff, that our customers really like, and with a pricing model that really works with customers, which is more kind of per user based. Almost go back to the seat model that you used to get in the old days when you take a shrink wrap CD and stick it into a server, if you know what I mean. Because there's been a bit of a SaaS backlash around subscription pricing, without doubt. Again, without realizing that there's still a price, right? There's still a cost to run a server, whether you're doing it via us, where in theory, the shared cost of security and scalability means that it's better than building it yourself, but not always the case, right? So I think Odoo, we've got a few customers using them, both B2B and B2C. We've got a manufacturer actually, that's Stewed. They're basically heated cushions. So they've got 9 B2C sites and a B2B site. They're running on Odoo, very happy with it. We've got a few other businesses, mainly out in the Netherlands, but we're seeing them coming to the UK as well. And it demos brilliantly. It's true SaaS. Interestingly, it's super, super configurable. And I think the configurability is what's really driving that innovation in ERP. I completely agree with you. We've got, I've grown up with ERPs back in the PeopleSoft days in the mid-90s when I Cambridge Technology Partners, etc. And you take somebody from a spreadsheet and tell them that they've got to tick that box, and that's now a mandatory field. They hate it, right? Everyone hates that. We've got a customer going to NetSuite right now, and I literally had that conversation with them. Are you starting user training yet? No. Okay, you're meant to be launching in 3 weeks. I don't think you're going to.
Right. Change adoption and change management is the hardest part of all of these. And everyone hates working in Excel and everyone loves working in Excel, and all business software fundamentally has to disrupt Excel. So
Yes.
first before it does anything else. I like that.
Exactly.
I appreciate the shout out for Odoo. We're not partners with Odoo, but open source software, right? Like
Yeah.
Oro Commerce, obviously, famously open source, founded by the original Magento founders, similar license. Odoo, I think they're on a similar license as well. Just a obligatory plug for
Yeah.
open source software, kind of like winning the market in a lot of ways.
No, and I absolutely love that. And then that open source openness is obvious in the product. Coming back to that configurability, you can create new endpoints in Odoo really easily, right? So you can basically, here's my data objects, you model them on the back end modeling. And then if you need to do a particular process, you can create an endpoint, model something within their Odoo process flow monitor thing. And then, have a webhook or something to push the data back into Patchworks. That's where our configurability comes in as well, because, with more traditional iPaaS and ETL tools, then it would be, I need to write a load of code to take this custom endpoint in. But the way, the way our connector builder works, once you've installed that instance into your account, it's yours. You can do what you like to it. So you can add new endpoints into it. You can change existing endpoints. And so them and Business Central have made a bit of a comeback in the UK as well. Very configurable.
Really?
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah, without a doubt. And the same thing, you can extend the endpoints of that quite easily, which was a surprise to me because I've never actually used it until recently. But again, tech CEO, I like to play.
You do.
Yeah.
I've seen your videos. I've seen your product demo videos. I'll switch gears, and we have to talk about an obligatory sort of topic on these podcasts, which is AI.
Sorry, Corley, you're breaking up.
Yeah. Well, no. So AI comes up a lot on this podcast and in every trade show and every conference and every LinkedIn think piece. We have an AI strategy. We have AI offerings that we just announced earlier this month. I noticed when I was going through through your website, which is wearepatchworks.com. Please check it out. I didn't see AI messaging slathered all over it. You haven't changed your name to patchworks.ai like so many other types of companies out there. And so I'm assuming then that you, despite being a technical CEO, are in massive denial about AI and hate it. What's wrong? Let's talk about your feelings, Jim. Let's see how do you see AI kind of in this space? Is it applicable to the iPaaS world? Is it applicable to e-commerce at all? Do you see it? Are you hearing people talk about it? This is some therapy because it's clearly you don't like it very much. Let's talk about AI, Jim.
Sarah Connor. No, it's um, yeah, exactly. I'm not an AI denier at all. I don't like getting into the hype cycle
You
too
heard it
early.
here first. You
Yeah,
heard it
no,
here first.
no,
Breaking
yeah,
news on the B2B Uncut podcast.
actually quite like AI. We're big users of AI actually, within the organization, but not in the product per se, but it is coming. And why is it? Why have we waited? I think everyone's rushed in. I don't want to be lost in the noise of AI. There's no point in just saying you've got AI. Why? What are you doing with it from that side of things? So on the marketing side, we've been using Gen AI a lot. So we've got quite a nice, when we add a new connector in, it means we have to write a load of web pages. So we trained one of the Amazon models actually, because there's going to be some interesting stuff coming out about how you trained your model and where you've got that data from, right? There's already, I was having a good chat
In
with
Europe,
Google. Yeah,
in Europe
right.
especially. Yeah.
In Europe especially.
We
Yes.
don't
Oh,
much
that's
care here in
interesting.
the States. This is a freedom land. So train your model
Fair
on
point.
whatever. But
Fair point. I'll have to redomicile the business. Delaware, right? That's the way to do it. So, no, it's, that's effectively how we do it. It helps us write pages because effectively, if you've got a new e-commerce platform that comes in, it can connect to, you're not going to put a web page up saying connect Oro Commerce to one of your competitors, right? For obvious reasons. So there's a little bit of knowledge in there. We use Airtable behind the scenes. We love our no code, low code tools. It goes off, talks to the large language model, builds those web pages. Our site, oddly, is actually hosted on Shopify, creates all those pages. They get indexed by Google. We get leads. It's a virtuous circle. I probably give away too much, but I don't mind it being out there. It's fairly obvious. So we've been using it ourselves, getting into the product. Well, what we're going to use it for. So we've got the scripting tool, right? We've got this custom scripting tool. There's no doubt you're going to have to write some transformations. If you've got a blueprint or you've got something really simple, you can use our no code, not low code shapes to do the mappings and stuff. But, there's a fairly good chance you're going to take this piece of data and you're going to have to run a script on it to do something. EDI would be a great example. If you're taking EDI messages in, the way they're formatted, there's not really enough of a demand to build a no-code shape for that. So we have scripts to do it instead. So why not add in to the scripting area, write me a script? Like, how do I transform this into this? That's a perfect use case for AI. My team have already been doing that anyway. So adding that in to the product's not going to be hard, and that should be out this year on that side of things. The other thing
fantastic.
though, yeah, no, absolutely. So that's something that my product team are going to say, what's he promised now on a podcast? But it is true. We've been talking about it internally. Some of our competitors have started building out AI flow builders as well. So, integrate Oro to NetSuite for me. It's something we're also investigating, but although it demos brilliantly, I don't really think anybody's using it yet, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
It might build out the flow, building out the steps of the flow is probably not very difficult. Then making sure that you add in like our new try catch shape that came out this week so that you can catch the failed records and stick them somewhere. That's interesting. How the large language model meant to know about that? What about all the mappings? How about your custom fields that I mentioned earlier that you put into your ERP? How much actual benefit you're going to get from it? So, I'm not at all an AI denier. I could really see the benefit of AI. Our ethos is all about making integration as easy and quick as possible. So we're going to have to embrace AI, but that means doing it in a way that it makes it easier and quicker than doing it yourself. Do you know what I mean? You don't want to add it in, get people using it, struggling with it, churning, basically. So, no, this is rubbish. I need to go write some code. So it's about, it's a bit like poker. You play your hand at the right time, Aaron. It's as
That's right.
simple as that. Yeah.
Yep, I agree. When ChatGPT first came out some versions ago, I started using it. I put back on my integration engineer hat and started doing ETL stuff inside the window, right? Not even using the
Yeah.
API, but just doing it inside the GUI. And I was impressed actually at how, for standardized message formats anyway, take this
Yep.
CSV, turn it to a particular sort of XML format that has public standards, right, that the model knows about anyway. It's actually quite brilliant at it.
Yeah.
And I thought I could have used this like 10 years ago when I was toiling away, getting flat files from someone and having to turn them into industry formatted, XML. Um, I love it. So you're not a denier. That's wonderful. It's good to hear. And I'm sure your product, your CTO will be thrilled to hear the new direction for the company. Uh, I like to ask people for advice, but not advice for me. Advice for our listeners. I like to ask our guests what would you tell our listeners? I'm going to assume that if you're listening to this podcast, you're in the B2B industry. You're either a practitioner, you're in the mines toiling away, getting pallets and truckloads out the door. Um, so if I were in that B2B trade and I'm a German building materials manufacturer or something like that, I've got my old ERP. It's hard to customize. Jim's not answering my phone calls anymore, so I can't call the guy who used to write all the custom modules for me. He's doing other things. I'm stuck with it. So my customers are emailing their orders to me, and most of my business is in spreadsheets because I don't like clicking around in mandatory fields. Eventually, everything ends up in the ERP. I would like a better tomorrow. I have a lot of offline processes. I have no visibility into it. From a digital transformation perspective, where do I start? What is the first thing I replace, or what is the first step that I take to understand my business? And your answer cannot just be, please buy Patchworks. I'm going to train you here. I know you're cheeky that way.
It wasn't going to be, but now I feel like I have to say that.
We
No,
are patchworks.com.
we are patchworks.com. Absolutely. We do everything. No, don't worry. And I can't mention, I'm going to mention the hammer anti-pattern a third time now. So yeah, I can't talk about that and say that. It's a hard problem, right? I would say go and get advice from similar companies that you know about. You're not going to go and talk to your competitors, obviously, but if you know people who've done the same thing, or if you don't, start going to trade shows and try and find the guy who stood up talking about their amazing ERP journey or their B2B transformation journey. Go and watch that person, and then go and grab them and say, look, well, how did you start? Go and get advice from people who've done it, I guess is where I'm getting to. Now, that's always down, I've always talked about it, and I've talked about it on the podcast at the last company we worked at. Go and get an expert in. But the problem is who is the expert? Because is it a consultancy business? Lots of our partners are, and they're really good, who will immediately go, yeah, I can talk to you about that. Here's an invoice. And then we'll start talking, you know what I mean? Go and get some actual advice from people. So we had, it's not B2B, but we had Bellstar Naveed up on stage at our event a couple of weeks ago. And he talked about his digital transformation and how he got started. And a lot of it was down to, I went and spoke to other people that had done something similar, but no one had tried to do it to a brand that big, ultimately. Certainly not in a full SaaS environment with Patchworks at the center. Obviously, I'm allowed to talk about that. And but he spoke to people who'd moved on to that e-commerce platform. He'd spoken to people who had, connected through to NetSuite, their ERP. He went and spoke to other people that had used Patchworks as well and used, expertise for integration. And he was like, okay, that means that's given me enough information now to go and find an expert agency who can come in and work with me on building this out. So I think, try and if you're the first mover, and to be fair, they were kind of the first mover into that space, but they gave themselves 3 years to do it. They did it in 2, and it's brilliant. It works really, really well. And why was that? It's actually down to good project principles, good prioritization of what we're doing, break a big problem into small problems, have a strategic goal, but we should break into tactical steps. And then like every single one of them that you do, like how much closer has it got me to that strategic goal? And don't be afraid to make decisions. I know this is almost into a therapy session, but the cost of not making a decision can be absolutely massive.
Oh, yes.
So
Yes.
be prepared to make the wrong decision, but at least you made a decision and you can reverse out of it as long as it's, not too big ultimately. So that would be the overall advice. Seek advice.
Seek advice.
Economic.
Yes, right. You shake the magic 8 ball some more. I love it because what you did not say was give all your money to Salesforce or something like that, where there are so many of those sort of large mega vendors out there who have a SKU, they have a product, right, for
Yeah.
every possible need in a mature business. And so often in our field, the answer is go buy something. And I love that you started with go talk to people who've done it, because
Yeah.
that's actually far more impactful. And knowing your priorities. One of the questions I also, I am also one of those terrible consultants as well. And one of the questions I always like to ask my clients is, what happens if you do nothing? Right? Walk me
Yeah.
through what is the result of no action here. In 1 year, if you don't make a decision, what happens? Because so often the cost and complexity of making a decision scares people away from ever tackling the problem.
Yeah.
But partly it's because they've never really visualized, like, well, what happens if I actually don't feel the pain and I don't do the work and I don't put in the full day at the job site? Where will I be? Right? If the
Yeah.
business grows, the way that I'm supposed to hit these targets, I have all of these problems, but now I have them at scale. So perhaps maybe I best sort of solve this now while the problems are relatively easy compared to where we think they'll be in 2 years. Right.
And
No.
the previous company we worked at, right, we had a UK fashion brand. It would have been the biggest deal we'd ever done. But they were a first mover in e-commerce. They were one of the first people ever to build big websites in the UK. They went global. Finally went headless. It wasn't a particularly nice way of going headless. So it didn't scale very well at all, unfortunately. And COVID hit and they couldn't pivot quickly enough because they were spending so much money putting, bluntly, what's known as lipstick on the pig to keep that running, that the moment that setup needed to perform, it couldn't. And, it was a bit of a Hail Mary coming to talk to us, but ultimately they ran out of cash before and it was a big business, multi-billion pound business that went pop in less than 9 months. COVID, lockdown started in March and they were gone by October. I mean, they're famous, right? It was very easy for anybody over here to know who I'm talking about.
Yes. Yes.
And that's a great example of not making that decision early enough. I mean, the chap who owned that company, there's some very famous conversations around how e-commerce isn't really a thing. So there's not a surprise those decisions weren't made, right? Because they're costly and expensive decisions to make, but not making the decision killed them.
Yep. And you've got to think through that, I think, ahead. So to sum up, I think, talk to people who've done it,
Yeah.
make judicious decisions about your business and plan for success, plan for a future of success. Don't plan for the status quo. And of course, buy Patchworks to then power your digital transformation and
We
give
are
you,
patchworks.com.
we are patchworks.com too. We'll just keep plugging it. Um,
Great.
but we can talk about referral fees maybe off after I've done recording.
Still
So the
contracted.
final, well, yes, yes. I always tell people you can pay me in brown liquor, and I'm quite happy. Right. So I always ask a surprise question of the guests that sometimes catches people off guard because we just spent 30 minutes, 45 minutes talking about like complicated technology and business. What's a piece of media that you've consumed in the last month or two that stood out to you? Could be a book, could be a television show, could be a movie, could be a podcast you listened to, a magazine article, whatever. And it some people like to be the straight A student at school and give some kind of like, I read a business book, for my MBA course. That's fine. If it was meaningful to you and you learned something from it, share it with our guest. Some people are like, I read this amazing science fiction novel and and they talk about that. What direction do you want to go? And what piece of media would you recommend to our listeners?
So I'm torn a little bit between Slow Horses on Apple TV. Loving that show. Brilliant.
Yes.
Gary Oldman's a legend. So's Kristen Scott Thomas. Just the whole cast are fantastic. But the BlackBerry movie came out last year. Jay Baruchel, the story of Research in Motion and BlackBerry. Don't think it really took off as a film. I love business movies, right? So Margin Call, The Big Short, all stuff like that. I mean, I consume that stuff. I absolutely love it. And BlackBerry is just brilliant. It's fun. It shows, we just talked a lot about, making decisions and what I didn't mention in that was like, plan for an ever changing market. So, we all know the story of BlackBerry. I loved my BlackBerry, right? They absolutely dominated email and instant messaging in, the early 2000s. And then effectively an extinction level event happened, the iPhone. And they didn't move with it, and they kind of tried, and the quality wasn't there anymore. And there's a card at the end. I'll play spoiler alert, but for those people who
I think we all know. I think
we all
if
know,
you're
right?
if you're unaware of Blackberries, I can't imagine you're listening to this podcast.
Yeah, and then so it was like end of 2000, whatever it was. The stock price was zero. So and it was a sad day. And what I loved about it was I was watching one of the kind of the extras that come on board on Apple TV. And Jay Baruchel, who plays Cliff Landry, it's one of the founders of BlackBerry, actually had a BlackBerry until 2019. So they approached him about the part, And he's like, "Oh, actually, no, I've got my BlackBerry now." And so eventually it broke and he couldn't use it anymore. He's like, and so there's a bit in the film where it's like, why would no one want keys? That's actually him. So it's just a really good film. Very well acted. Obviously, as all these business films are, it's not 100% accurate, but it's great. And it talks about ice hockey, which is not a secret love of mine. So yeah, it's all good.
I love that. I love that. So I'm watching through Slow Horses right now. Just started season 2, actually. Apple TV.
Okay.
Highly recommend. It is an excellent show. It's one of those that I would have expected to be a BBC original. I was a little surprised that it popped up as an Apple TV original instead, but they
Yeah.
just got renewed for their 6th season, I think. And which is
Today.
in streaming, that's unheard of. Like
Yeah.
6 seasons. Like that's not many shows make it that far. The original Star Trek didn't make it 6 seasons.
No. Well, TNG only just made it 7, I think, didn't it? Was that right? Or was it
Right.
9? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's nerd. It's nerd time, I suppose. So, spoiler. You can. I don't know if anyone's still listening at this point. But Jim is a nerd. I am a nerd. So Slow Horses and the BlackBerry movie. You said there was no science fiction listed, and I'm a little surprised by that,
Yeah,
Jim.
I know. I'm struggling a little bit in a minute. I'm still getting over the sad demise of Ian M. Banks. so, so I did, I got through, Neil Stephenson's latest. I can't remember the name of it. It's one after reading. It's based around kind of carbon trading and trying to reset the atmosphere. Actually, that was a really good book, but I can't remember the name of it, Aaron. So yeah, I think you're Googling. So thanks, man. That was a good read, but that was last
We'll put
year.
the link in the show notes if we can find it.
Yeah, yeah. But you're right. Genuinely, it's been an interesting. I don't think I've ever been so busy as in, I started a Patchwork last January. We talked about transformation earlier. We were very much an agency that had some software. And then we launched our new software last year, which is obviously what we won the award for, and 75 to 80% of all transactions that go through Patchworks as a business are now going through that software, a combination of winning new customers and migrating old ones across. It's been a very, very busy time. I've not had a chance to dig into it, but I've got a great management team now, really good product team. We're doing well as a business, so it's time to. Good point, man. I need to start looking at the list and see what's worth reading again. So.
I love it. Well, I really appreciate your time and really value the partnership with Patchworks. It's a new partnership, but you guys got a connector built in record time with
Awesome.
Oro, and very happy to be able to have our product easily connected to the 130 or so, I think you said, integrations that you have available. Especially if you are looking at you've got a somewhat complicated tech stack with multiple systems, multiple databases, basically that have a piece of your data, and you need to tie them all together in real or near real time. Perhaps you want to feed some analytics and BI off of that. You should definitely check out Patchworks. Of course, Patchworks works with a lot of e-commerce platforms who I won't name. You can name Shopify all you want. I don't really care. Shopify's not really a competitor, despite what some analyst firms may think. But really glad to happy to have you on, and congrats again for winning the innovation award last night. And we will put some links in the show notes to the media that you recommended. And thanks again so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. It's been great.